Welcome. My name is Michael Casey, and what you are witnessing or are about to witness for the next few moments is a video book of sorts entitled Black Women, A Language Without Vowels. I'll first begin by giving you my preface. In this preface, I would like to thank Patricia Hill Collins for The Matrix of Domination. I would like to thank Angela Davis for Women, Culture, and Politics. I would like to thank Dr. Frances Cress Welsing for giving us the ISIS papers and giving me, a black male who deals with the affliction and oppression and emasculation from white supremacy, helping me understand the plight and the further denigration of the black woman through that act of emasculation of the black male. I would also like to thank strong black women such as Eleanor Holmes Norton, who walked out of that Senate hearing on February the 17th in front of a judicial hearing full of racist white Republicans who in essence said and inferred that black women don't have the right to dictate what's best for their own bodies. I would like to thank individuals like even Dorothy Cotton, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer for your brilliance in feminine activism during civil rights. Fannie Lou Hamer was so strong and so boisterous and audacious in her singing protests with Mahalia Jackson that she enraged J. Edgar Hoover to the extent that he wanted to silence her, thus bringing black awareness, feminism, and civil rights to the world stage. I would like to thank Angela Bassett for vehemently telling the producers of Monsters Ball where they could happily shove that script because she realized that denigration is not worth any form of compensation. Let me proceed into the introduction. Neely Fuller, who Frances Cress Welsing borrows from, believes that there are 9 areas of people activity. Bear with me while I give you all 9. He says they are economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. You see, these are 9 areas in which people manifest their human behavior either virulently, virtuously, or a hybrid of the two, or they find themselves behaving, let's say, in an incredulous manner between the two. But basically, all functionality of being is conducted through those 9. Ironically and sadly and debasingly, women, namely black women, have been exploited and accosted in all 9 areas of people activity. Let's start with politics. We have a black president for the first time in history. This is resounding. However, in that wake, in that historical black accomplishment, we have what I would like to call is the First Lady Complex. The First Lady Complex basically states or reveals that the terminology of calling one the First Lady is sexist and chauvinistic, even misogynistic in its usage, because it infers that a woman cannot aspire to be equal or cannot be granted equal presence with that of a male. Because if a woman were to be president, we don't have a title for what her husband would be called. The title First Gentleman doesn't exist. So the term First Lady relegates her to only being a first subjugate, a first subordinate, the first oppressed one, i.e. the first property, the premier property of a male. So let's discuss how politics has afflicted the perception of the woman and has further afflicted the perception of the black woman. So when we look back at slavery, first let's start with the history of the word First Lady before we go into slavery. It was first used in 1863. This will help us come full circle with slavery. It was first used in 1863 in a memoir, in a diary that was found, where it was referencing Mary Todd Lincoln. And he called Mary Todd Lincoln the First Lady. Now, interestingly enough, 1863, of course, we know was the year of the Emancipation Proclamation. Many of us, or some of us, know that Lincoln himself was a racist. He said that he's of the opinion that whites are the superior race, blacks are inferior to whites, and if it was up to him, he would prefer banishing or castigating blacks to Nova Scotia or Sierra Leone to keep the pure white race sacred, because he said black people are a cancer to his people. I say that to make you aware of this. The same year the term First Lady was originated is the same year a racist president who called us inferior, basing his stereotypes off of individuals like Galen of the 2nd century Rome, who called us apes. Thomas Jefferson, who in 1781, in his writings on the Notes from the state of Virginia, said that we evolved from monkeys and we were incapable of any intelligible thought whatsoever. That same year, he emancipated blacks, not out of humanity or morality, but out of capitalism's cause. And he also was instrumental in the coinage of the term First Lady. So that term in itself has some bearing and has some significance in the perception of how now a black woman is viewed as the first black First Lady. You see, black women have always been viewed as property by the white male in society, because when we look back in slavery, we see that even heads of the plantation, we can look back to 1848, and we can see that Fanny Kimball, who was the wife of Pierce Butler on the famous Georgia Pierce Butler plantations, he was famous for planting Sea Island cotton. Well, she got to see slavery firsthand, and she remarked that even the head slave driver of the slave master was afflicted because his wife was raped routinely by the slave master. This is an individual who was deemed a member of the family, and I say that loosely, and I say that almost in jest, and I say that balefully because, of course, blacks were considered unequal. We were even considered in the Constitution to be 3/5 a human being. So let me put it in perspective for you. If black males were 3/5 a human being, because the Constitution was only written for the benefit of the male. It was only written in the male regard. So if it only referenced males as being constituents of humanity and saying that the black males are 3/5 a human being, what does it say about the 3/5 spouse whom the slave master routinely raped? You see, her ovum was decimated by the slave master. It basically says that the chattel in slavery was black women. So let's bring this full circle. Historically, black women were looked at as property or chattel or merchandise of the black male. I'm sorry, the white male. The black male looked at black women through a guise of disgust, through a lens of uncleanliness. Thus, he repulsed her because of her forced infidelity. You see, he felt emasculated within himself to the extent that he couldn't protect his woman from the slave master's sexual aggression. So he blamed her. He blamed her for being loose. He blamed her for being a licentious woman. So he even had malperception of his own woman. So bringing this full circle, we see that the black woman in society has a position subjugate to that of the male in society. And when we look at the fact that white supremacy dictates that all black males have been emasculated because they have all been afflicted or burdened or exploited by white supremacy in some fashion, this says that the black male's counterpart, his black woman, is even less than he is. If we look back at the harems in the trans-Saharan slave trade, and we look back at the concubines therein, and we look at the eunuchs who were castrated and level with the abdomen, the black woman now was looked at as less than the concubine, She's looked at as less than the eunuch. She's looked at as the premier object. She's looked at as the premier subjugate, the premier subordinate, the premier merchandise of a male whom she can never be equal to. Because the terminology, again, First Lady, implies or denotes that she can never be president. She can never be the premier official of the government. And if she were to become that, there is no terminology to describe what her husband would be called. The terminology first gentleman does not exist. It is a terminology that sets the standard for the revolutionizing of sexism. And it's so covert. Now that we have a black woman who is the first lady, it's even more revolutionizing because now we add race to that sexist equation. And she is looked at as lower than an emasculated black male who is 3/5 a human being. So she is not only the first subject of an emasculated black male whom she can never be equal to, she is the first object of an emasculated black male. We know that Michelle Obama probably has a higher intellectual capacity than any of her male counterparts. Yet, sadly, because of the First Lady complex, as it relates to now a black woman in office, the terminology does not deem her equal. The terminology does not infer that anyone she inspires, any of the black women she inspires, could ever be president. They can never be the first official. They can only be relegated to being a subordinate, a weaker vessel, the first subject, the first chattel property, the first merchandise, the first minimized one, the first oppressed one. And this is baleful. This is despicable because we have this thing in society called sexism, chauvinism, misogyny. And as a black male who is emasculated by white supremacy, I have compassion for my black women who sadly won't even be deemed equal to myself, thus won't even be given the opportunity to be perceived as a fraction of whole. Black women are a language without vowels because they're unrecognized in society. Some of the oldest languages in history, Hebrew, etc., didn't use vowels, so it was hard for individuals who translated that to pronounce the words. Black women have no pronunciation in society, yet they're the most poignant expressions of God's word.